All right, so I have this. I was reading through my Bible this morning, and like I normally do, and I've been working through Matthew, the book of Matthew, for like the last several months, and I don't read in Matthew every day, but a lot of days I have been reading Matthew for like the last probably 2 months, and I found this. I'm on chapter 16 finally, and I was reading through this today, and the title of it is "The Leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees." And I was thinking about this. I read down in verse 11, "Why is it that you don't understand that when I told you, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees, it wasn't about bread?" And this is about, so Jesus speaks in parables, and this is all throughout the Gospels. And so I was interested in why, like like parables. I'm kind of I'm into etymology, like the meaning of words and like word parts. And so I often look into like the origin of words. And in fact, one of my dream careers that I'll never pursue is etymologist, being a word expert. By the way, so one of my overarching things is words, just like words in general. And the word's powerful, man. Read John 1, right? The word, this universe was created by a word, right? And we, like, the words that we use are so important. And in the Old Testament, think of the time like 2,000 years ago, knowledge was like captured by religion and maybe the dawn of academia, philosophy. So like PhD is like is okay. So getting a little bunny trailed here. All education is based on philosophy, right? So like Plato and Socrates, and so we're talking just a few thousand years ago, right? Ancient history, and as always, like, look this stuff up. Like, I only know this stuff because I'm interested in it, and this is the kind of stuff I look at on the internet, instead of going to like Pornhub. I go to like WordHub. I don't know if that's a site or not, but anyways, just kind of nerdy like that. But parable is so para is alongside. So think of like para educator. It's somebody that teaches like with a teacher, right? A teacher's assistant. Paralympics, right, is like alongside the Olympics. So that's what para means. And then bole or bola, BOLE with a mark over it. I don't know. I'm not a language expert, but it means to throw or cast. So if you take the term parable, it comes from the word parabola. So you might know the term parabola, which is like a U-shaped. It's actually a mathematic term where things are concentrated or go out from. So if you think of like a cone, it's essentially a cone or a funnel. Shape is like a parabola, and we see this like all over, all throughout the universe. I believe it was like maybe the 1500s, when this was like it's probably Euclid, or I don't know. You look this stuff up, man. This is all I'm just running and gunning with these videos. I'm just kind of thinking of what's in my head already. But so parable alongside, and to throw or cast alongside. So then think of the term parable as applicable to Jesus in the time of the Bible where people were not educated. I would guess that probably a lot of people didn't have a big vocabulary. Probably just like communication was very like kind of cut and dry. If you even reading the Bible, and some of this probably is because of interpretation, but even reading the Bible, it's very like kind of dant, da dant, da dant, and there are some like literary devices that are used in the Bible. If you do some Bible study, like reading commentaries and stuff like that, you'll be able to find some of those literary kind of devices just to like tie everything together. But essentially, like the Bible's a collection of like fragments, because that was the how people communicated back then. And so the parable, you're taking something that, so man, this is getting like, I would say in the weeds, but these are like big concepts though. So you're taking like a concept, like think of religion at the time, 2,000 years ago, and Jesus said, I came to fulfill the law. So now he's taking a concept that was only interpreted by priests and religious experts, right? And coded by the scribes, right? And now he's taking all of that and giving it to people that may not have a big vocabulary or even like understanding of language and how it works, because language was fairly new. I mean, we're talking 2,000 years ago. Recorded language is less than 10,000 years old, like the dawn of written communication. And like we don't know how people communicated before that, right? They could have clicked, or it could be click languages like we see in tribes, indigenous tribes, or I mean, we really don't know, right? There's no YouTube videos from 10,000 years ago, right? It's all just guesses and cave drawings. And so that's one thing I think is like completely mind-blowing and fascinating about words in the first place. But so I'm reading about parables I'm reading about in Matthew 16, and what pops in my mind is parables while I'm thinking about this. And Jesus says in verse 5, the disciples reached the other shore and they had forgotten to take bread. Or in verse 6, Jesus told them, watch out and beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. So I'm not going to go into like what that means, or like kind of draw some meaning out of that. I'm more concerned with like the cut and dry idea of why Jesus would speak in parables. And it says in the Bible that only some will understand. And so what I'm thinking, so parable, so I did some additional research. So here's where it gets kind of weird. Our eyes have cone cells, and we have 3 different cone cells. That's how we see R, G, and B, red, green, and blue. And that's how we see color. So if you want to be really mind blown, the color that you see is actually the frequencies that are rejected by the object you're looking at. Pretty crazy. So there's some people that have 4 cones, 4 cone cells. And this is like a rare condition. So color blindness is when you don't have some of those cells, some of those 3. And I forgot what it's called when you can see 4. So that extends your vision into the UV range. So that's shorter wavelengths than the visible light spectrum. So I always go back to the light spectrum. The Bible says that God is light. Photons, we don't know how they come into existence other than it's a change in the state of radiation. That's how it works in the entire universe. And so what I'm thinking about parables is like, it means to come alongside and throw or cast, which is interesting. That's defined as throw or cast, because the Great Commission is to make disciples of men, or make become fishers of men. Or Jesus says, I'll teach you how to be fishers of men. Sorry, I'm messing it. I should really dial this in. Investigate all this for yourself. You know, I'm not lying, but I'm just saying you also should dig into this. But it's really fascinating to me to think about like the parables and the cones. Your eyes see light. And if you back up to Matthew 15, this is the last thing I'll leave because I'm at 10 minutes. I'm trying to keep this under 15 minutes today. I heard somebody say if you're putting out content, like be respectful of people's time. Like time's the great equalizer. We all only have 24 hours in a day. And heard Jim Rohn say one time, he said people could complain about, if I just had more time, I could be successful. And it's like, well, clock strikes midnight. Like that about wraps it up. Like we're all bound by time. And speaking of the changes state of matter, like I was just talking about in light, time is the rate that we've agreed on. It's based on a cesium beam. That's the atomic clock. I think it's cesium 130 is the exact element. And again, look this kind of stuff up. I'm just nerdy and I read about this stuff. But it's literally the rate of decay of this particular element called cesium 130, which is how we get the atomic clock that keeps the time. So that's what the Navy uses. I don't know if you knew this, but the U.S. Navy is the one that keeps the official like world time in Annapolis, Maryland, I believe. And it's based off this particular element because it has the most stable or longest half-life that we've discovered, like to right now. Now, I know there's some person out there that's nerdier than me or wants to out-nerd me and say, oh, there's a new atomic element or there's a new clock. Whatever, man. Like, I read an article or two or a few of them like 2 years ago that was about their discovering something that's better than cesium 130. Whatever, man. But I'm just saying, like, it's literally based on the rate of change of that element. And what I'm thinking is, well, let's go back to this. So in Matthew 15, Matthew 15:18, this is Jesus talking. Well, let's just start over at 15. So Matthew 15:15, Peter said, "Explain this parable to me." And Jesus says, "Do you lack understanding?" He asked. "Don't you realize that whatever goes into the mouth passes into the stomach and is eliminated?" So basically Jesus is saying, like, whatever you eat, you know, poop out, basically. But what comes out of the mouth comes from the heart, and this defiles a person. So again, think about, or not again, because this might be the first time you've ever heard any of this stuff. What comes out of our mouth is the air that we push out, and it's our thoughts, which are electricity and light. Again, read the electromagnetic radiation Wikipedia just as a primer for this stuff to start if you're interested in any of this stuff. But it comes from the heart, which is ran off electricity. And so when I read about this parable, when I read the definition of the word parable, and I'm reading in Matthew 16, that about the bread, and like, why is this that we have parables? And then I'm thinking about, well, actually, I've never done anything on the whiteboard, so here, I'll just do this right now. But I was thinking about, if we had So it says, so you can see there like a cone, right? Cones. And it says the way is narrow, the gate is narrow. But if you go through that narrow gate, so we're in the third dimension, right? And I believe that God's, man, this is getting really in the weeds, but I'm just going to throw it out there. So I believe that our dimension comes from black holes. And, oh man, I don't want to explain. Maybe I'll do another video at some point of how I came up to that, came to that understanding. But it's basically about lower dimensions. We can observe lower dimensions and how our dimension is projected into a second dimension, right? 2-dimension, which is a flat plane. Gives evidence to how a 4th dimension could project into a 3rd dimension. And we know nothing about black holes. If you really want to get on the bunny trail, read some stuff about that. But we have the narrow way, right? Which leads to eternal life, right? We don't know what's on the other side of it, other than what we can read in the Bible, which is not much. But it says wide is the way that leads to destruction. Boom, 1 point. So we either start at 1 point, we find the 1 point and lead to forever, or we consider this forever and we end at 1 point. Parables.